Welcome everyone to What the Force, and welcome to a awesome topic. To me, this is like a dream topic. We're going to actually be covering the work of Marshall McLuhan. The media is the message, and as a lens through all of the Star Wars multimedia. And to join me is my friend Gina Sanders. Welcome, Gina, to What the Force.
Hi. Oh, I'm just like a giggly mess right now. I'm so excited.
Oh my God. I've been wanting to have you on the podcast for a while, because when I tweeted out about Marshall McLuhan, you're like, Marie-Claire, I know who that is. And I'm like, oh my God, who knows who Marshall McLuhan is?
Me, actually, when you tweeted that out, I was like, oh my goodness, freaking out. I actually know who that is. And then I immediately tagged my academic advisor for my undergrad. And I was like, about to put that degree to use for the first time ever. So this is great for me.
Yeah, and you're actually going to school for communications, and you went to school for mass communications for your bachelor's, and you're actually still continuing on with your master's degree, which is amazing.
Yes. So my undergrad, I got my bachelor's in mass comm, and that was just a grab bag of a bunch of things. So I worked with television, I worked with radio, I did a little PR, little comm theory, which is where, Marshall comes in. And then I decided to continue that for my master's. Today was the first day of my last year. So,
oh, congratulations.
Thank you. Fingers crossed, December 2020, I will be graduating. My thesis will be completed because that starts this Friday. It's actually about television and how messages get conveyed. So we're on a very similar track, Lou.
Yes, no, this is great. And my history with Marshall McLuhan is my dad was actually had a doctorate in philosophy, primarily David Hume, but he often studied Marshall McLuhan because he was not only a Canadian, which I am, but also, from a media philosophy perspective, Marshall made his life's work. I don't know why I'm calling him Marshall. Do you call him Marshall? Is that
we are best friends with him.
Okay, yeah, no, he's like the best, and actually is like even in the same. He did most of his work in the province that I currently live. So nice. Like he's like it. There's a Canadian minutes like thing on CBC where you can like see all about him, and like the medium is the message. Like it's very dramatically overacted.
I don't think I've ever actually told you this, but when I was little, I used to pretend I was Canadian. I had an American Red Cross blanket, which I only got because I thought it was a Canadian flag blanket. And so when I was little, I would just be like, oh yeah, I'm Canadian. I'm not American. So I used to pretend to be Canadian.
I feel like there are some Americans that wish they were Canadians right now. I love you all.
We're going through stuff. It's okay.
And like one of my favorite things was that Gina asked me to bring her Timbits from from Canada for a celebration.
Well, because here's the thing. We had Timmy's here for like a hot second. Yeah. And they were great. But then I guess some deals fell through or something, and they were like, get rid of Tim Hortons. And I was like, you guys, this is the best thing I've ever had. How dare you take it from me? And I cannot go back to Krispy Kreme or Dunkin's or any of that. I'm just like, what do I do without Timmy's? And so I thank you. You saved my life that day.
Like they were like squished in a Ziploc bag, and like I tried to put them back into the box, but it was like in my suitcase. Like it was a whole thing. But she ate them, and I was like, I did a good service. I did it.
Thank you.
I did a good service. Back to Marshall McLuhan.
Yeah.
Marshall McLuhan was a media philosopher, and he made it his life's work to understand the sort of effects of media on society and how different technologies actually change how humans interact. And, his famous big saying was actually, the medium is the message. And actually, it's so funny because when the book was printed, it was printed wrong and with the wrong type letter on message, and changed it to the medium is the massage. And he just kind of rolled with it and was like, yeah, that's right, because it massages your brain differently and it affects you differently, and the different forms create different things for your body to get into. And he just kind of rolled with it. I don't know. He also had his doctorate in BS. No, he knew what he was talking about. And when you actually listen to it, and you listen to people who talk about him from that time period, they're like, his thoughts are interesting, but I don't know if it'll happen. And now when you listen to him, you're like, wow, was he like a weird prophet? Like literally everything he said has come true. And I actually do want to play one clip kind of before we get into it, because I want to give you like the feel for the Marshall McLuhan-ness of it. And if it's okay, Gina, I just want to play the Global Village one, because I think that's a really good one to kind of start.
Yeah. Did I watch this clip in a class once?
You might have. All right, so this is Marshall McLuhan talking about the Global Village, and it's going to sound exactly like Twitter.
Global Village is not created by the motor car or even by the airplane. It's created by instant electronic information movement. The Global Village is at once as wide as the planet and as small as a little town where everybody is maliciously engaged and poking his nose into everybody else's business. The Global Village is a world in which you don't necessarily have harmony. You have extreme concern with everybody else's business and much involvement in everybody else's life. It's a sort of Ann Landers column writ large.
It's a sort of Ann Landers column writ large, i.e., we live next to everybody in the world.
Yep.
Because of our interconnectivity through technology. Doesn't that sound like Facebook, Twitter, like all of these social medias? And he was just talking about the fact that we have the telephone, we have TV, because that's all we had access to at the time that he was talking about this, specifically, in the 1950s and 1960s. And he actually, was very prolific with his writing and with his theories. And if you listen to what he wrote, there's very little that he kind of got wrong, especially as the technology not only transformed how we lived and worked and interconnected with each other, but also how, humanity almost shrunk to the size of a village with how we interact with each other. In one of the books that he wrote, he refers to the light bulb as the simplest medium without message. And the only message that a light bulb can tell you is if it's on or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When we first had that Twitter conversation and I was like, okay, let's do this. I got to, do a little research, like reacquaint myself with these ideas. Mm-hmm. Actually, a few weeks later, in my pro-seminar class, one of the readings that we got was actually, understanding media, the extensions of man. And so I was like, okay, the universe is just like, yeah, you're going to talk about this. This is a thing you definitely have to do. And so, of course, that's something, the idea of the light bulb was mentioned, yes, this is what I study and this is what I like, but I'm also one of those people that really like simple explanations. Mm-hmm. That's actually that's my crusade while I'm in grad school, because everyone comes in and they're like, we're going to use this like dollar worth word. And I'm just like, so we're going to learn the definition of the dollar word, but then we're going to bring it down to a quarter, because I think layman's terms are great because it makes it accessible to everyone. And because of that, I actually, if you don't mind, I'll read a quick little thing. Actually,
sure, of course.
I like how they explain it. So I like how it says, electric light is pure information. It is a medium without a message. It doesn't matter if a light is being used to see baseball at night or it's being used for brain surgery. These activities are the content of electric light because they would not exist without the light. This underlines the point that the medium is the message, because it is the medium that shapes and controls the scale and form of human association and action. So one of the things that I really like is that, and one of the points that he makes is like, so we have this light and no one ever thinks about the fact that the light is on. I have a lamp that has like 3 different light bulbs on right now, and I don't even think about it. I'm just like, it's a light. because it helps me see my screen right now. Even the lights on the back of my phone and my tablet and my computer, I don't think about it, because the point is it helps me see the content of my notes. It helps me see you. It helps me see in this room. And that's like the exact point. No one ever stops to think about the light as this medium and how it shapes what we're doing and how we wouldn't be able to do any of the things we're doing without it. And so I feel like one of his really big points is that if you don't fully understand the medium, if we don't take the time to think about the light and how it shapes us and forms us, then we don't fully understand the message. You can't ignore the medium. So
yeah, no, that was perfectly put. Perfect. No, it's great because the light being the simplest form of medium, right? But we have so many more mediums out there nowadays than we even did in his day. And each of those mediums transforms the messaging of whatever we experience. And if you ignore the fact that it creates almost a box or a shape or a form by which we absorb or ingest the content from it, if you ignore that, if you ignore how you're receiving it, you may not understand fully what is actually being said to you.
No, yeah, that's I think exactly the point. And then and let me know if this is jumping ahead, but I really like to pair the example, because I feel like all of that, not that it's simple, because once again, coming from like years of thinking about this and thinking about communication in this way. But the other idea that I like that he uses is this idea of, we have a train, and travel was not revolution. Well, when trains were, first invented, and you had like steam locomotives and things like, travel was not revolutionary to people. Moving across great distances, transporting things, none of that was revolutionary. People have been walking since the dawn of time, since we've been able to walk. But how it connected far distances and how it revolutionized it. And because when we started getting trains and things, we built cities. And so everything that comes from that is like what's important, how we're looking at how everything changes. And so after hearing that clip, and we're talking about how when he was talking, all we were doing was talking about radio and like things like that.
Yeah, now television, radio, movies.
And now we have Twitter and things. And who would have thought that like this new technology that we're having, it's like communicating, like you and I are communicating right now, not in the same, like even like country. Communication is not new. Us talking isn't new. And yet this medium allows this very podcast to happen. And it's like something, and this is another thing that I really liked in this article that I was reading, because we take it for granted. We get these revolutionary technology changes, and we're just like, okay, that's great. Whoa, this is new. And then 2.5 seconds later, we're like, okay, and I can talk to you through Zoom. I can talk to you through Skype, through FaceTime. And we never stop to think, I can talk to you through FaceTime. I can talk to you through Skype. And what is that doing to our message that we're actually saying? Okay, this is just all really cool to me.
Well, yeah, and we are doing that. We're doing something that Marshall McLuhan probably never really even thought about, or maybe he did. He was very, very smart, and he saw a lot of interesting concepts, like especially TV. He was like, well, you're basically inside of my house. You're now inside of my house, even though you're really far away. So he probably would have been very interested with how these things are set up. But like Twitter, for example, especially when it was only 140 characters, would have really blown his mind, because it's like, how can you get out a thought? Although, to be fair to him, he was very good at branding his own messaging with snappy statements about it.
Yes.
He would have been one of those vague tweeters that's like, the medium is the message, and then like just shooting it off and gotten like so many likes and things like that. He was very good at that. But no, he would have seen how interconnected we are, and yet how different aspects of Twitter will end up transforming and changing the content within it. you have to go with somebody on a Twitter thread to understand a complete thought and not just the single statement. And so it ends up leaning into the medium's message, ends up leaning into these kind of thrown out statements into the universe without necessarily the opportunity to explain further meaning, point of view, being able to say, you know, through my specific lens, you know, giving yourself time to actually say, this is my point of view, come along on my journey. And so it ends up being, in some ways, polarizing. As much as the interconnectivity also ends up thinking that we need to be in each other's spaces because we are so interconnected, it's like you and I are sitting next to each other across the table.
So that's another thing that I've been thinking about, because not only Twitter has no room for nuance, even with our threads, even with, you know, that's why everyone's always doing like their notes app apologies and notes app explanations and things.
Because they literally write out a whole, like, basically letter and then tweet it as an image, because Twitter doesn't allow for exactly, long form.
Well, and I think about that because even I think about how many times because I didn't want to make a thread, so I went back and I, you know, reworded how I did things and did certain symbols and certain abbreviations, which is a whole nother thing in itself, because not everyone uses the same symbols and not everyone uses the same abbreviations. But one of the times I felt essentially the only times I felt really proud of my comm degree is when I use it on Twitter, because I work in Res Life. So I mean, I use it there, but like not in the sense I think most people would assume that I do. But I remember I saw, and I don't like jumping into people's conversations really, because I don't want to get yelled at. But I saw this person, this guy, he tweeted a sexist joke, and people came to let him know that this was like a long time ago. Also, this is not like a recent thing, because I felt like some people's minds would have gone to a specific thing there. But this guy tweeted a sexist joke, and people came to him, and I felt like they were very, you know, polite about it. They were like, "That's really, really sexist. You know, you might want to think about what you're tweeting." And the guy replied, and he was like, "It's not sexist." And he said, after like some more conversation, he said, "Well, I never intended it to be sexist, so it's not sexist." And essentially all the women who were replying was like, "Okay, but your intentions don't matter. It's sexist." To which I did a really vague subtweet. And I was like, so we have to understand how we all understand communication. So for some people, communication is literally in the message. But for most people, communication either lies with the sender or communication lies with the receiver. So if communication lies with the sender, your intent is, I made you a grilled cheese sandwich or something like that. I don't know why I picked that because I'm lactose intolerant maybe. But the point is, I made you a grilled cheese sandwich, and that's my intent. And I expect you to understand my intent. There's no work around it. That is the message. And me as the receiver, if you see communication happening in the receiver, your intent doesn't matter. I can take what you say any kind of way based off of my own experiences and things. And to me, that's where communication breakdown happens, when someone communicates as a sender and they're like, this is my intent. The joke wasn't sexist. That's all that matters. And I'm like, no, I'm the receiver. I can receive that, which you said anyway, that is sexist. And like, so there's like this whole, which I feel like is Twitter in a nutshell.
A nutshell, yeah.
Where there's this whole breakdown where it's like, you could be saying the exact same thing, or someone really didn't mean to offend, and yet we're not communicating at all. And you can stop me if I'm rambling, but one of the other things,
it's fascinating. Continue on.
I was reading this article, and both of the authors' last names were Foss. So it was Foss and Foss, and they were bringing in feminist theory. And one of the things that they were talking about was narratives are valid evidence. So even though, depending on women of color, you know, white women, and even if you break it down more like Black women, Asian women, like you can even in like our differences, like, yes, we are all women, but we still experience life differently. So, but even if we experience life differently, our narratives are all valid evidence. So even if my lived experience as a woman contradicts your lived experience as a woman, that doesn't mean that the experiences are wrong. Like someone's is false, someone's is invalid. They're all true, which I firmly subscribe.
Wow.
To that. I've lived it. Quick side note tangent, and then I'll get back on the other tangent, and then we'll get back to Marshall. But like one of my examples is the school board came to talk to a bunch of the students at my school, and they were like, is there anything that you improve? And no one was really raising their hand or anything. So I raised my hand and I said, well, I experienced this microaggression with this certain professor. We were reading Fires in the Mirror, which is the story. It's a true one woman play by Anna Devere Smith, and it's New York, and it's these issues of Jewish relations and African American relations. And so I was the only Black person in my class, and so the teacher called on me with the intent of showing the African American experience.
Oh my God!
I was kind of like, you just really, and they're a wonderful teacher. I don't think they meant it at all, but in that moment, they made me the token Black person, and they were like, Gina can fully identify and understand the Black experience that's happening here. And I was like, ma'am, I'm from the Midwest.
You're like, I am not a New York person.
I'm not a New York
so
person.
I can't speak to that.
Exactly how Black people live in America is different regionally. I don't know if you knew that. and so I raised my hand and I was like, so we have really well-meaning professors here. Mm-hmm. But I had a microaggression. And then immediately after, they were like, okay, thank you for sharing your story. And then immediately after, a white man raised his hand and he was like, well, I didn't name the professor or anything. So I don't know how he knew if we were talking about the same person, but he was like, I have been in similar situations and I never felt like there was a microaggression. I never felt like there was any issue, blah, 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 blah. And in that moment, he invalidated my experience. He said, I live a different experience. You are wrong. And I was like, sir, I don't have time to tell you why everything that just happened is really, really terrible. But you're also high-key proving my point. And so to go back on to this other tangent I was on, Foss and Foss, that's very much his experience is valid. He didn't experience that. But my experience was also valid because I did experience that. And they contradicted.
Things can be both.
Yes, things can be both. And so when we have this communication and one person says, my intent is the receiver, this is what I meant, this is all that matters. And someone else goes, no, but I see communication as the receiver. My lived in experiences informs me, and the lived in experiences can inform the sender how they package their message and things like that. And that's where all this communication breakdown is happening because everyone is valid. But also everyone lives differently and everyone sees communication happening differently. And then that's why Twitter's a hot mess. That's why Twitter's a hot mess.
all of it together. And also the fact that it's, limited from a technology perspective. It's limited, and it's becoming even more limited because we're going to be getting those new Twitter updates where, I think that they're good in that you can limit who can reply to you. Yes. I actually think that that's a very good thing to do.
Well, I was going to say that in itself
will change.
Especially after everything, and not that we're going to get really big into Tross, but especially after with everything in Tross, I'm just because I'm the first person who's if you need to mute, even me, I'm just you guys, if you need to mute or block me, I don't mind. Do whatever keeps you
safe,
healthy, do whatever keeps you safe, And so I actually didn't know about that change. So when you said that, my first thought was oh my goodness, that is fantastic. But then I thought, I purposely, so obviously not all my friends agree with me,
it can create isolation from a thought perspective.
And so that was my thought. I was because I already live in this bubble. I already have friends who think about actually Star Wars in general, just life in general, different than me. And, obviously we're still friends because we're normal, decent human beings. But I like seeing people's different perspectives because I'm just let me get out of my bubble. And so, and so that is where I'm so glad that just where I think nuance needs to come in because yes, be safe. When people are harassing you, oh my goodness, you don't need to put up with that, but also your bubble. And so there's this balance that's not happening. And oh, there went somewhere. There's this balance that's not happening.
The balance is missing?
You know,
what are you what?
You guys can't see me, but I'm sipping from an Adam Driver mug at the moment.
The balance is broken. People have no balance. Yeah, no, because it is, if we can have discourse, and I have actually reached out to several friends who didn't agree with me on Tross, right? Because I actually wanted to understand a little bit more about where they came from and, you know, what their experiences were. Because again, everything is from your own lens, and that is valid. And that's actually something on a recent episode I said. I was like, you know what? I don't want to take any love you had for Tross away from you, or TLJ, or anything to do with the saga. Like, that has never been my point. But I do have to be critical about the things that I see from a structural perspective, from you know, a movie making perspective, because that's how we make better story, is that we comment on this and we have discourse. But the first and foremost, the discourse must not be attacking or mean spirited, or, you know, say something fundamentally about the person that is outside of their own opinion. But also, if they don't want to talk about it, like they also, you need to curate your own experience too, I suppose.
I mean, that's why. So part of me looks at, and there's no soapbox. I've destroyed my soapbox a long time ago. So this is not going to be a Tross rant. But so I consume my media, my brain, and I'm sure everyone does this, but in multiple ways, in the fact that I love just a good dumb action movie. I love a good, like, Hallmark movies are my jam. And we all know how Hallmark movies, like Christmas movies, are gonna go. And so I like the movies and things that don't make me think, but I also like the things that do make me think. And one part of my brain when I got my mass communication degree, I actually took all the comm classes possible at my little 4-year liberal arts university. And so I had to start taking English classes that cross-listed with comm. And so because of that, I also earned my minor in English, and I got like one class away from earning my minor in theater studies. I always have to add that because I'm like, I was so close, but then I graduated a semester early. So I was like, I'm not going to earn that.
I'm not hanging around for another semester just to do this.
But I got close. I took the classes. And so part of me looks at, and once again, if you like The Rise of Skywalker, yay for you. Tweet at me why you like it. I want to know. And so I'll just say, in general, when I look overarchingly at the sequel trilogy, there's some things that don't make sense to me. And some of the ways they don't make sense to me, it's because I took these classes that said, this is how storytelling goes. Mm-hmm. And when I look at the product that I've been given, it doesn't match up for me. There are plenty of people it matches up for, but the way I was informed, that's not how storytelling happens.
Yeah, and the lens that you've built and your perspective and all of those things. Yeah.
And so these things are competing at once, because part of me is just like, Gina, fake, space, pew, pew. And I'm just like, oh yeah, great, woo. And then part of me, there's like still this little voice that's going, there's a way you tell a story. And there's a way you tell a story that's interesting to you, Regina, as a person. And so I went off a tangent. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I think it's all good context. And, you know, I wasn't really planning on getting into Twitter just yet. I was actually going to use that later on, but I will refer back to it. Okay. But it is important to understand that, like, that's the complexity of the world we now exist in. And then we have Star Wars, which is like, according to my conversation with Leland Chee when I interviewed him last year, is the largest multimedia franchise ever to exist.
I love Star Wars, guys.
I love Star Wars too. And it's so interesting to see in the Disney era where they have taken it. Because in the last 42 years, it has tried so many of these different angles, perspectives, ways of consuming media. And we're going to kind of talk through some of them with this Marshall McLuhan lens. And this should be a really interesting discussion, actually, because I really haven't thought about some of them in too much detail, other than kind of how Marshall might view some of them a little bit. But But, since he's long dead, we're going to hopefully not disappoint him. So he's rolling over in his grave and being like, oh, these ladies talking about my theory.
Marshall McLuhan, Force Ghost, shows up.
You've already heard what he sounds like. So you can tell he was a very white man. And it's so funny because all of his videos are like got these psychedelic changing backgrounds because it was like the 60s. And so yeah, you get the vibe he's kind of like in Elsewhere talking about us or in The World Between Worlds talking about it.
Yeah.
So I wrote down, I'm just going to go through the big list and then maybe we'll go through them kind of individually. But, Star Wars exists in movies, in music, in now TV shows, in the live action world with The Mandalorian, and we're going to be getting way more soon. Animation, but not just animation, but we have, kind of the Dave Filoni cinematic universe from a from a storytelling perspective, but we also have the Lego Star Wars verse. We have books, every single grade level, baby's first ABCs and lightsabers all the way up to adult fiction. We have books that are encyclopedia level knowledge or dictionaries. We have reference guides. We have in-character reference guides. We have cookbooks. You can taste Star Wars. Imagine that, right?
Truly. Yeah.
We have comics. We have video games. We have merchandise. You can wear Star Wars. You can be part of Star Wars. That includes costuming and things that are like semi-costume / merchandise. You have Funko Pops. You have lightsabers. You can be Star Wars. We have video games. We have Jedi Fallen Order. We now have VR, which is almost like a different level of technology in video games. We have, and these are kind of a little bit more on the periphery, but they still count from a communications perspective. So I'm going to include them: branding and marketing and how Star Wars appears in the ether. And that includes the Star Wars show, personalities on Twitter that talk about Star Wars, even down to, the Star Wars Twitter or the Star Wars Facebook account or the Star Wars Instagram. These things all are part of it. We have fan creations because that takes Star Wars and makes it our own. It's transformational levels of communication on top of it. We also have, kind of all of these online forums: Twitter, Reddit, bulletin boards, Discord, YouTube conversations is also Star Wars. And the tools by which we use inside of the media to form the content also change the message. So by using a genre, by using an animation technique, by using one type of form over another inside of the media itself, it creates a different box, frame, hold for the message. This is how complex Star Wars is. Was that a good summary?
I think it's a fantastic summary. The very first thing that jumps into my mind when you're listing all of those various things is, so obviously people consume Star Wars differently. Some of those things, like just because you read the books doesn't mean you read the comics and everything. And we all have these different assumptions. And so that is not what I am knocking. I'm not knocking getting different interpretations out of things. But one of the reasons that I'm so glad we're having this conversation, this idea of when you are unaware of things, you don't consume it the same. And so that kind of goes back a little bit to the idea of the light bulb, and this idea that if you don't fully understand the medium, you don't fully understand the message. So if you're not thinking about what the light does for us, you're not getting everything. So what the Force is, I think in general, I understood what a meta approach was, but I never ever actually like got into it really or investigated things. The first time I heard about Joseph Campbell was actually I want to say my sophomore, junior year of undergrad, when we were in like this cultural studies that was like, no, you have to read books from different cultures so that you understand other people. And so that's where we started going through the hero's journey and things. So I'm not as familiar with it, but when I saw that, I was like, that's Star Wars. And everyone was like, yeah, Gina, we've been new. And I was like, no, but you don't understand. I just made the connection. That's Star Wars. So one of the reasons I really like the educational component. And so even though there are times when I go to Star Wars, I'm just like, I just want to have fun. I just want it to be like, I say this affectionately, a dumb space movie. And then there are some times when I'm just like, no, but we need to be aware of the medium. And so there's this quote I really like, and it says, for any medium has the power of imposing its own assumptions on the unwary. Prediction and control consist in avoiding. This is a subliminal stage of the narcissist trance. And so I just think about, if you're not aware of how your medium, whether that be animation, how that be books, how that be the theme park or any of that, is present. And that's why I'm so glad that you put marketing.
Galaxy's Edge. It was on my list.
Yeah, like theme parks and things like that. And that's why I'm so glad you put like
yeah.
Yes. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so glad you put marketing and PR, because there's a reason why PR is often linked with communication, because that's very much sending you a message. If you don't ever stop to think about how that medium is packaging Star Wars to you, you're just unaware. You truly don't understand. There's this subliminal message that's being thrown at you. And if you never stop to unpack what that subliminal message is, even the teensiest bit, so I'm not saying you have to like pull out a big textbook or anything, but if you never stop to think about the teensiest bit, then you're losing so much of what the message says. I mean, part of me thinks about, from like a practical standpoint, I think this is before we started recording, but I was talking about the thread I saw on Twitter of the Rise of Kylo Ren comic. And someone was like, do they not understand how popular Ben Solo is? And one of the things that I said was, forget for 2.5 seconds, good storytelling. I know that's terrible. From a monetary financial perspective, you think Disney or Lucasfilm would cash in on this incredibly popular character that sells. And I feel like personally, they didn't do a good enough job, but that's me stopping to look at the medium and the motivations behind this giant company and thinking, they also just want my money.
Yeah.
And part is the motivation. And if we never stop to think about all of those things, then we lose part of our message.
Yeah. Like, one of the things, like, so movies generally, like, I'm going to go through the kind of obvious ones really quickly, because I actually want to talk about some of the more interesting ones that have developed in the last few years. So Marshall McLuhan would say that movies are warm media. We kind of are hot media. We kind of sit there and we absorb and we just take it in. It's very easy for us to just experience. He would say that television actually speaks to us on a colder level, to say that we experience it, but it makes us think about things a lot more, because we have to kind of work for it a little bit more. And like books, because we're literally reading the words and they're appearing in our brains, they're even colder in that we have to work really hard to form the pictures in our brains, to understand what is happening, to kind of almost vibrate between, picturing what's happening, reading what's happening, and then understanding what's happening allows our brains to have to work a whole lot more to get the message out of the medium in books. Right. So that's very generally speaking saying that if you are reading a book, and this is not a judgment call on, man, people that read books are smarter. No. It's actually just how our brains form to the medium that they are experiencing. I would say that audiobooks actually do change how we experience the medium from reading a book too.
Right.
There's sound effects in Star Wars audiobooks. There is music, right? It is a different experience to read a book versus the audiobook. So that's just some generalistic stuff.
Can I give another example?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm going to admit, and so this is for anyone who's listening. If you're like, oh yeah, perfect sense, I got you. If you're that person that's just like, still don't got it. I've been studying this for years, and it does not always make sense. I had to like read that example multiple times. So that's also really my goal in my life, to be like, if you don't understand something, I will always find something else to give you. So hopefully this is for those who didn't get it. I love you. I hear you. Another example of hot media is a photograph. So yes, I could see how someone could argue you interpret a photograph different ways and you see different things. Yes, that is true. But when you look at a photograph of a dog, you see a dog and that's what it is. And an idea of cold media would be a cartoon. So one of the things that I saw, it says, so if you have a cartoon that consists of a simple circle to represent an eye, a few squiggles to represent hair on top of the head, and a curved line to convey a smile, that is a lot more involved of you seeing, trying to understand what something is, because it just takes a lot more involvement on your part and interpretation versus an actual photograph of a dog or someone smiling. And so I just want everyone to be on the same page about like, it's just like what work goes into you filling in the gaps to create a full picture of something.
Yeah, with the limited communication medium that you're given, right? Mm-hmm. So I've always viewed it as like, how much effort does your brain have to do to fill in the blanks?
Ding, ding, ding.
So I am not an expert. So I actually had like a little bit of a praised joy come over me when Gina was like, oh my God, you got it, Marie-Claire. I feel like I'm like I'm learning from the foot of the master. Oh my God. No, I loved it. No, but really, because it's like, okay, so your mind has to work, right? And, like radio, like Marshall really loved radio because your brain had to work, to picture things, but you also heard it, compared to, say, movies and television, which were more immersive, right? So if we think about, say, movies, television, kind of the other things that we've just talked about, and think about Vader Immortal on a VR, right?
Yeah.
And being almost as immersive in Star Wars as we can get without going to Galaxy's Edge. And even Galaxy's Edge has some very specific limitations from a medium perspective. But if you think about the story itself, I did a ton of deep dives into the actual content, but I wasn't able to play the game. Actually, VR makes me kind of sick. So I didn't play it. I don't own VR. I just watched like videos of it online. But the story's very, very in your face because the content needed to be extremely clear.
That makes sense.
If it wasn't extremely clear what you were doing and how you were doing it, because of how immersive it was, your brain just needs to absorb directly. It's like very, very close to the surface rather than farther away with, different points of view and different, like think of VR compared to a book, right? You can do a lot of nuance in books, but in VR, it like literally needs to be, the content is riding very close to the surface.
Yes. Do you mind if I give an example that is not Star Wars related?
Yes, of course you can.
So my favorite amusement park in the world is Universal Studios. And so they have the dark rides there, which dark rides are actually my favorite type of rides. And my all-time favorite ride is actually the Transformers ride. Oh, and cool. They have they have like walkthroughs of them on YouTube if people are really, really curious. But you have these long lines where the whole time, so you can go on this ride if you've never seen any of the new Transformers or any of the old Transformers. I feel like Optimus and Bumblebee and Megatron are big enough cultural icons that you kind of just know who they are. And if you don't, they'll explain it in the line. So you go through this line and they're like, here's what's happening on Earth. Here's what you need to do. And they're explaining all of these things to you. And I mean, it's a fun ride if you don't pay attention, but once you get on, and this is where it's connecting, it's an immersive ride because you get in and the way that the technology and everything goes, you really feel like you're falling off a building. You really feel like Megatron is like blasting you with fire right there. It's very like you, for the solid 5 minutes or ever how long the ride is, you are in that world. It's the same for the ride that's in Hogwarts in the Wizarding World of Harry Potter.
Mm-hmm.
For that, however long, when I'm not the biggest Harry Potter fan in the world, so whenever they cast whatever spell on you,
Rise of Resistance, people have said it's absolutely
my goodness,
immersive and brilliant.
So thank you for saying that, because I forgot that exists, and that, since I love dark rides, that's actually my thing. It's the exact same thing. For how long that ride goes, you are literally in that world, and if you don't pay attention to the beginning stuff, and so no matter what you're thinking, the ride is going to continue. And so if they're like, raise your arms and do this, and you don't, well, the thing's still going to happen because it's how the ride goes, but you don't get the same like experience, or you don't get the same, there's a missing connection because you're not fully participating in that. And that's just way different than you sitting in the theater and watching, whether that be Harry Potter or Star Wars or Transformers. There's this element where it's like, no, it requires your understanding and your full involvement for you to get like the fullness of the experience, versus like my mom who falls asleep in the theater. Love you, Mom.
And even I would argue that from a TV perspective, the choice to release a show and watch it week to week, like The Mandalorian was released week to week, versus now choosing to just binge the whole Mandalorian, will change the experience of the content and change your overall, I don't know, understanding of the story through the fact that you actually have the ability to see it all at once. Or that you can actually see anything that you want to watch again. You can absorb it. Anytime that we are able to absorb it again, you're going to be able to have access to the content more often. Right.
Very, very much so. And I'm a big fan of week by week things, even though my patience is just like, I want to know what happens. Because I like the idea, and this kind of brings in, because I mean, we don't just use one medium, in a single instance, because it brings in this idea that, everyone's got a podcast that's recapping it. Everyone, we're going on Twitter, we're talking about what happened, what we think, what we already know from Legends and all these things, where we think everything is going. And so I think about how we have all these things, and maybe you miss something, maybe you didn't see where something's going when you watch it week by week, and then you go back and binge it, and you're just like, oh no, now that I've watched it in a solid block of time, all that connection makes sense if you missed it. And so there's just I agree, there's different things that come out of the different ways that you view it.
And to say that, from a Kathleen Kennedy perspective, they really do want Star Wars to be one story. Everything that you experience in Star Wars is interconnected to everything else. And I don't necessarily agree that they were successful in The Rise of Skywalker, but that is a side note. Please ignore that if you loved it. But do you know what I'm saying? So they want everything to be interconnected, but they also, Disney, Lucasfilm needs to recognize that when something is released, it is also the experience of the people that experienced it that is also released at the same time. So this podcast, as an analysis of Star Wars, is also Star Wars, and that's something that they cannot control.
Exactly.
And that is a very difficult thing for any multimedia enterprise to understand, to protect, to uplift, especially one that's trying to have the thematic elements of compassion and love and redemption and found family and, hope and, all of these different elements in there. And yet they can't control the messaging as soon as it leaves there.
Well, and part of me thinks that they tried, because so I have seen all of Rebels and all of Clone Wars, but I've seen them all exactly once through, and it's been a while. So I need to go back and revisit them. And so I know that when you had Rey and Ben like healing each other, people are like, oh my goodness, here's all these examples in all of canon where that's a thing. It's not something they just like pulled out of nowhere. And one of the things that our Mandalorian show we would talk about was like, what in the Mandalorian do we think is going to connect, or if anything is going to connect to the Rise of Skywalker? And so we were talking about how one of the episodes released that Wednesday instead of the Friday. And one person put forth the idea that it's just because they know that a lot of people like to go see movies Friday nights. They don't want to have any kind of competition. And I don't remember who it was, but someone else said, well, there's going to be something in that episode that they want us to know before we go see it. And then
Baby
afterwards,
Yoda
there's like a Baby Yoda. Yeah. I call him Yellow because that's what we did on our show.
Oh, sorry. Yellow?
No, it's fine. But yeah, it's Baby Yoda force healing. And part of me looked at that as them trying to control, because it's something that's really popular right now. It's a way that we're all engaging. I mean, they took a gamble. There was no like guarantee that we were all going to love Baby Yoda, and yet we do.
We do, yeah.
But so they took this gamble and saying, here's this new thing that people are going to tune into because it's new, but also because this fandom has an obsession with Mandalorians and Mandalorian culture. Let's hope that they love Baby Yoda and accept the things that Baby Yoda does. We're going to have Baby Yoda do this thing so that when they go see this other thing, they accept it.
Yeah.
And
there was a lot of that in Rebels too, like foreshadowing TLJ, some things that happened kind of in The Force Awakens that were interconnected between Rebels. And so it's like,
which
is interesting.
Oh, go ahead. Well, I was going to say, and I burned my soapbox once again, but to me, that's the purpose of, what is it called? The road to, the rise to the different movies when they release all those books.
Yeah, the rise to the episode 9, yeah.
My favorite, I don't read a lot of them, but my favorite Star Wars story is Lost Stars. Actually, this is a conversation. This is also a conversation that we had where you asked me if I was a Reylo, and I said no, ? And then you were like, yeah, you are. So when I read Lost Stars and I got this story between Cyan and Thane, and I was like, oh, look at them on opposite sides. We're leading up to TFA. And then I got Rey and Ben, and I was like, oh, look at them, opposite sides.
Yeah.
Are they in love?
Well, and to me, this is the iterative storytelling of Star Wars. And like we have like a very similar story in Jedi Fallen Order, right? Like in that, the light and dark, and then they have these like communications over like comms, and she jumps into his comms, and like we have Trilla and Cal, right? Like that. It's very, very similar from a storytelling perspective. And so I see that as, so like when you use the example of The Mandalorian and the Rise of Skywalker, it's like they can't really control. So this podcast, this conversation is Star Wars. And so they can't really control how it goes, but they're trying, because they're trying to say, look at this thing that we are 85-90% sure that you'll accept, so that you accept this other thing, which is why they have that mirrored storytelling, because they're like, you're going to accept it right here because we desperately want you to accept it right here, which is why I think some of us get disappointed when it doesn't go the same way. It doesn't maybe, because I've always viewed it as like ring theory, where it's always trying to sort of tell the story again and almost learn from the mistakes of the past. To me, that's always been like kind of Callus being a different version of redemption, Trilla almost being redeemed at the end, but then dying. And when we don't see a different version of events and it feels maybe too similar to what we've experienced before, we don't like it. Or some of us don't like it because we're like, we kind of already saw this. So we want a different version of the same thing.
and part of me, so I, once again, like this last semester was super busy. So I relied heavily on podcasts and things to review books and stuff. And it was Lipstick and Lightsabers. And what is that book called? It's whichever one has Cardinal, and it's essentially like a Phasma sequel.
It was Black Spire Outpost.
That one.
Yeah.
And so when they had Cardinal's redemption turn thing, and he died, I think, in that. And so one of the things when they did their review, they were like, they had a redemption that ended in death. And then other people were like, they had a redemption that ended in death. What does this mean for Ben Solo? And then we were all like, well, they're not going to do it. And
it it actually just has made me more galvanized to atonement by death. I do not want to see another atonement by death for a very, very, very long time. If I never see another atonement by death for as long as I live, I will be happy.
Can I do one more tangent? Has there ever been one that worked for you? Has that ever worked for you?
Atonement by death? No, I hate the American monomyth. I think that death by redeemer is weak, and it doesn't show how to come back from true darkness. I mean, maybe Vader. I mean, he was old though. The
okay,
OG,
we're on the same page.
The OG Redeemer, original gangster Redeemer.
Well, I think, and even that is a conversation that's been had and could be a whole separate thing where it's like, well, who does that count for? It counts for Luke. Does it count for anyone else in the galaxy? Does it count for Leia? Does it count for me as an audience member consuming this? Do I believe this? And so, I mean, that's a whole nother.
They had to go back and make 3 movies to talk about how much we wanted him redeemed, because he used to be a good guy and he used to be a hero.
It took me the longest time to care for Vader, but as soon as I saw Anakin Skywalker, I was like, I love you.
Yeah, no, you care about him and you want him redeemed and you want his son to redeem him, but it didn't change the galaxy by which they live in. And that's what Living Atonement does, whereas Death by Atonement doesn't. And that's the key. That was a total side.
Yeah, I feel like that's a whole other thing.
Redemption side point. But what I'm trying to get to with this discussion is that because everything is so complex, because they're not only doing the conceit of one medium, they're saying that all of these mediums are interconnected in a massive web of conversation and content, that actually these mediums are all the message. It is all the message of Star Wars. They need to be incredibly clear with the content, because it's the coldest medium in existence in the outcome of the multimedia. Every medium needs to be very clear with their thematic elements. Is that a good, like...
I agree, because I think that leaves room still for the different interpretations with different... okay, you can let me know if you think I'm saying this right. But I really like this. So everyone looks at Star Wars and we all see hope. Like, no matter if it's any of the different ones, we all understand that hope and found family are an important factor in Star Wars. And I don't think I've ever met anyone who disagreed with that. And if I did, I actually do want to have a conversation with them to say, why not? So I know that, because I think one of the things that I've seen in general conversation on Twitter is like, don't tell me how to consume Star Wars. I'll consume it how I want. And so I don't want to tell anyone, if you don't see hope, you're wrong. In a nicer way, I want to know why you don't see hope if you don't see hope. So I think there are some things where it's like, it's true.
Sorry.
So I think there are some things where it's like, this is an undeniable fact that this is a theme, or this is how this goes, but we can still have the nuance of, I interpret that differently. I see that differently. I like that differently. So to me, that makes sense. And I just want to add another thing to this idea of, it should be incredibly clear, the personal and social consequence of any medium. And that is to say, an extension of ourselves result from the new scale that is introduced into our affairs by each extension of ourselves or any new technology. And
that's
so
Marshall
I think,
again, right? Yeah, that was, yeah.
Yeah, that's him. That's like his exact.
There's a good example of how he says that, like, by having the telephone is an extension of our ears to the other person, and our mouths to the other person. Like, so we can say our words, and like us talking over Zoom to do this podcast, it is also an extension of our ears, eyes, mouths, and like, you know, being able to actually see the non-verbal communication of the person, which increases our absorption of their communication.
And I think that little aspect of, this is an extension of us, gets forgotten in this idea. And I think that's part of what validates and gives argument and evidence to, this is Star Wars. Whether someone listens to this and they're like, oh my gosh, they're completely wrong, I don't agree. Doesn't matter. This is Star Wars. and because it's an extension of ourselves. And so all these different mediums end up being, it's us. We're all Star Wars.
Yes. We are all Star Wars.
We're all Star Wars.
And that's like an incredibly complex idea. But because of how humanity communicates, how we take messages, absorb them into ourselves, and then also create content with the same, conversation, we need to also be very clear with how we are communicating. And sometimes things can be fun and they can be joyful and they can be jokes like memes. I didn't even mention memes, but memes are actually part of the communication of Star Wars, and like prequel memes, and how it very much transformed, parts of the prequels that people don't like into parts that they love was actually very ingenious, and it's its own form of medium. It's a varied thing and it is complex, but yet the big multimedium, the big hat that is Star Wars, the big thing that says, this is Star Wars, or, when somebody tweets, Star Wars is for everyone, or when they talk about Star Wars and how people live Star Wars, that is also Star Wars. How do you control or say clearly what you want to say? Well, everything that Lucasfilm creates must now be exactly what they need to say. And when they don't say it correctly and it doesn't land correctly, it ends up causing personal interpretation, to your point.
I think it's just because The Rise of Skywalker is the last thing we've got. So it's fresh in my mind. I'm so sorry for still harping on this.
There is actually a comic example and it was the Die Nurse comic for Darth Vader Dark Visions, right? So Vader Dark Visions. So that comic itself is, I have not enjoyed two pieces of Star Wars, and that comic and The Rise of Skywalker are those things. I literally can enjoy almost everything else. I like even the Thrawn novelization, which I'm not really like a huge Timothy Zahn writing fan because of, I can almost hear him like going, interesting. Like I can almost like hear it. And maybe it's the audiobooks, because I also tried to listen to the audiobooks and how they use the organ music in the background. It like gets into my head. I don't know. But like even his writing to me is still Star Wars, and it has all of the elements in there. I just don't necessarily enjoy it as much. The Die comic to me specifically hit me on a very specific level because it felt very meta. And in an insulting, non-Star Warsy way, it felt like it just wanted to tell a story to be non-Star Wars. It was very weird.
Well, and even that connects to this idea that so there's this guy named David Sarnoff, General David Sarnoff. I don't know if that's how you say his last name, but when I saw the panels of that comic on Twitter, and I was like, how many people did this go through and how did that get approved? Do you not see how that looks? And there were people who were like, no, it's just the way, the artists like drew it. That's just their style. That's why she looks like that. Once again, we're getting back to your intent versus how I received it. They were like, no, it's just like they were blaming all these other things. And I know with Carrie Fisher's passing, they were blaming all of these things for why certain stuff ended that way. And so when I was reading through one of my articles, I specifically pulled this quote because I didn't know if you had heard it. And I don't think the way Marshall talks about him, I don't think he agrees with everything he said, but this quote specifically just really resonated with me. And it said, "We are too prone to making technological instruments the scapegoats for the sins of those who wield them. The products of modern science are not in themselves good or bad. It is the way they are used that determine their value." And one of the examples that they had is this. I'm very sorry if you don't like violence. This is like a mini violence warning. But the example that they used is guns. So when you kill the right person, bullets are great. When the wrong person gets killed, bullets are bad. And that's so, and politics aside, that's the exact example that well, he's a general, so we see why he used that example.
Yeah.
But but I think of that idea where it's like we're using this technology that is an extension of ourselves, that how we present this technology and this medium informs what message is being communicated, and we have to understand this medium in order to get the message. And yet we're putting all of the blame on the medium, and people don't even recognize the medium all the time. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that was so fascinating, especially because I've seen the argument that we should understand that our characters, our fictional characters, aren't just doing things because they are fictional characters. The author had to give them some kind of purpose, some kind of intent. Mm-hmm. And so we have people who are like, this character is good, this character is bad because they did this, they did that. And it's like, well, an author drew them, wrote them, directed them.
Mm-hmm. Came from their psyche.
And you have to acknowledge that to get the message.
Yes, you have to acknowledge that people created this. And what's really interesting is that I would actually argue that there's even more storytelling going in to Star Wars than usually most medium, like especially like TLJ as an example. One of the things I learned actually going to like seeing Knives Out for the second time and actually listening to the commentary by Rian Johnson is I learned that his cinematographer actually is an expert in color theory. And so the whole of The Last Jedi has visual symbolism, has the music of John Williams, which does its own thing. And you can literally just listen to all of my meta music episodes to understand that medium, which is its own piece of technology within the movie. But the color theory, the costuming, the sound design, the visualization of the sets, and all of that is speaking to us on Star Warsian levels. And so when something isn't used in the appropriate way, they killed the wrong man with the bullet.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So what is Star Warsian is a very weird thing, and what we will accept, it changes over time too. Like people did not like Ludwig Göransson's new score. Some people didn't like it. They were like, it's too much not like John Will. I don't like the electronic use of. But if you understand, hey, this is TV. It's got to be a different sound for TV. It's part of the medium of TV. And you kind of just roll with it. Maybe it'll be good.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. But then you also think, because that was one of the conversations I know a bunch of people had with that idea. They're like, I'm really glad this doesn't sound like, John Williams.
It had to be different,
This other thing. And I'm like, and that's one of the things that I know many people have been like, I don't know what this means, but I know this is Star Wars, or I don't really know how to describe it, but that's not Star Wars. And I think most people can look at The Mandalorian and think, that's Star Wars. And I know that maybe some people's hesitation might have been the music, but part of me was thinking, okay, this is without a doubt Star Wars to me.
It has all the thematic elements.
Without a doubt a Western to me. Yeah. Like my dad was like, oh, this reminds me of like the spaghetti Westerns I watched when I was a kid. And I was like, and the music is doing that, because that's one of the things my dad pointed out. He was like, "Oh my god, this is Clint Eastwood to me. This is the music,
the music, the cinematography, the action-oriented, like cutting and look, cinematography itself, like it all speaks into the genre, and genre itself is part of the message from a medium perspective."
Because when you are given something as a genre, you expect something from that genre.
Because it's just another tool. It's another form of technology, another thing that we use to communicate.
And I think that's where people get the breakdown with Star Wars in general, where people who go, I was expecting something sci-fi. And we're just like, well, Star Wars isn't really sci-fi. Or for those of us who are like, oh, it's a fairy tale. There's something I expect at the end or during the course of a fairy tale. And so there's something we expect from a genre because we've been trained that way.
It's like logging on to Twitter. We expect 240 characters a tweet, and if we suddenly, if the rules suddenly changed and we were able to write essays, Twitter would just like die of a conniption, like you know, or if they went back to 140 characters, you know, suddenly for some reason, I don't know why they would, but you know what I'm saying? Like, as soon as it changes, that changes the messaging. It changes the function. And so, you know, this is really not like trying to say anything about any aspect of Star Wars, but I do think that being aware will help you understand what Star Wars means more, because the medium, this multi-medium thing, is important to us. It defines so much of our culture. And if you are aware and you have these tools to analyze what you're doing or what you're seeing, what you're consuming, and how you're consuming it, and how active your brain is when it's consuming, then you are able to pick up on the subtle storytelling or the not so subtle storytelling. Marshall McLuhan had this great quote, which is that there is absolutely no inevitability as long as there is a willingness to think.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
It's a good quote, because honestly, in our global village, in our massive multi-medium, you know, mythic one-story monomyth that is being told, we also need to consume with active brains, in my opinion.
And that's just one more thing that I think is very unique about Star Wars. I mean, I've been active in fandom in general probably since I went off to college, which was, and I graduated high school in 2015. I'm so sorry for people who are like, oh my gosh, she's a baby. So been on this earth 23 years. And Star Wars is unlike any fandom that I've seen. So if anyone's familiar with my Star Wars journey, introduced to it as a kid, Han, Frozen, and Carbonite scared the mess out of me, said I hated Star Wars, came back for Kylo Ren. And so when I got introduced, I very much got introduced when Disney bought Lucasfilm. And so as I got to know people, and I was like, oh my goodness, how do I get into fandom? What do I read? They were like, well, this whole set of books and comics that aren't canon anymore, but they're fun. You can read them. Star Wars is just unique in the fact that there's this idea that canon matters, which I can see how, so I think consistency matters. So if we're going to say something is canon, keep with that line. But one of the things I was most happy that you included on the list of mediums is fan art and fan fiction. I know people who are very much like, you can't write fan art, you can't do fan fiction. It doesn't fit in with the story. Like they can't wrap their heads around it. And then I've also very much met people who are like, why do you have that headcanon? That doesn't make sense. But then as we got talking, they would talk about things that they wanted or things. And I was like, that's exactly your headcanon. And I like that idea because all these mediums are, yes, extensions of ourselves, but there's this so personal thing about writing one-shots and fix and making all of this art that is also very much Star Wars. And I felt like even more specifically, you and the audience that listens to this can fully understand how valid that is, because I feel like it's very much said fan art and fan fiction is a thing that women do and it doesn't count. And I'm just like, that is completely false. There's so much validity in that. And so I wanted to say I was really happy. I was really happy that was included because it's so valid.
To summarize everything into one big final statement, and then we'll sign off and everything like that, is everything is Star Wars. And consuming all of the different mediums and being aware of the fact that how you're consuming them and the way in which you are consuming them. So like YouTube video people, reading Reddit posts, being on Tumblr, just watching the movies in the theater, listening to the John Williams soundtracks, all of these different things that we listed before and talked through them help the message to the overall big message, which is the big umbrella of Star Wars. And there's no way we can avoid it. It is literally a fundamental part of our Western media culture. So just being aware of it helps you be informed about what is being said and how it is being said. That is the point of this episode.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Exactly.
Well, Gina, thank you so much for joining the What the Force community, I guess, in a way, because now you're a person that I can be like, Gina, I've got this cool thing, and I'll drag you back on and be like,
I'm always coming. Let's go.
Yeah, but this is fun. This is so much fun to talk about it, and it is a very, very interesting topic. If you're interested in Marshall McLuhan, he's got tons of videos out there, tons of books. I highly recommend reading him. He's very readable because he liked to brand his own sayings.
Yes. Go to Google Scholar, type him in, and you don't have to have like a school database or anything if you're not in school, and you can get PDFs with his work and things.
Yep. And also like Marshall McLuhan Speaks, if you just Google that in, you can watch kind of all of his videos that were recorded for probably the CBC. Like it was a Canadian thing, like And it will be eerily prophetic, right, of what we are experiencing now in our large global village and how these things adjust, etc., as we are more interconnected over time. Thank you, Gina.
Thank you for letting me use my degrees. Thank you for letting me be here.
I feel like somebody could actually do like a full doctorate on Star Wars as multimedium. Like, it's crazy. But I hope we did a really good job on this episode.
I think we did. So,
Gina, if people are interested in finding out more about you or following you or, whatever you're interested in, knowing the complexities of the communication ecosystem we live in.
So I'm on Twitter, and then I talk Star Wars on Unmistakably Star Wars.
Yay! Unmistakably Star Wars. We love them.
Thank you.
All right. Cheers. Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music composed by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We'd like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love and are obsessed with What the Force. Melody, Night Huntress, In Wild Space, Susan, Jessica, Brad, Black-Eyed Lily, Anna Perez, Jawa Dog, Macau Mom, Neil, and James. Make sure you like and subscribe on your podcast app of choice or on YouTube. Leaving a 5-star review on iTunes helps other people find the show. You can connect with us on Twitter at What the Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook, or on our website, whattheforce.ca. We also have a new Discord. Links are available in the liner notes. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.